Well, hello again. I haven't made a video in a while. It's been about a week, I think. So I thought I'd hop on here today and just make a quick video. Oh, I don't know how quick it'll be, but let's be honest, I talk a lot. But it's about a subject that I hear come up, and I was watching a live homeschool question and answer thing yesterday, and I saw the question submitted again, as it always is, and that is, what do you do about socialization? It's something that every one of us as homeschool parents hear so often. One of the first questions that people ask you when you tell them that you homeschool is, well, what do you do about socialization? How do you get your kids socialized? In fact, there's a precious older woman in my community who, she routinely makes it a point to tell me, well, it's fine what you're doing now in elementary school, but as soon as they get to middle and high school, you got to put them in school, or else they're just not going to be socialized at all. So, I get upset sometimes about the question just because I get tired of hearing it over and over again, but and not upset like I'm angry at anybody. It's just one of those things. Is probably like twin parents who constantly hear the same questions over and over. As a homeschool mom, I hear that question so much, so it just gets tiring. But I want you to remember, if you've watched any of my older videos, you might remember that I never planned to be a homeschool mom. That was not the plan for me. I planned to go back into my career as a social worker. But what I saw around me, the whole reason I chose to homeschool is because I loved what I saw around me in the homeschool families in my community. They were the children, in my opinion, who had the best social skills. I mean, they were able to have conversations with adults as easily as they could with other children. I was noticing that the children from the homeschool families that were in my circle, they were not addicted to screens. They always had a book with them, and they were always kind of reading, and they were able to fit in a lot of different age groups. So, at the time I was facilitating a MOPS group, a Mothers of Preschooler group, on the base that I was in. And so a lot of the homeschool kids would come with, their moms to, well, not MOPS, but a Bible study that I was a part of during the day. And I would just notice that these homeschool kids fit in so well with a lot of different age groups. They would help with the real little ones. They could, like I said, they could talk to adults. And so it was a wide range of ages that they were good at navigating versus just other kids the exact same age as them. And then, I was noticing that the babysitters that I picked, were homeschool kids. They were homeschool teenagers. And the reason that I loved them so much, I mean, if any of you are watching this that were my old neighbors, if y'all remember Hannah was like the dream babysitter. I mean, I feel like homeschool kids are really taught responsibility a lot of times. She had a lot of siblings, and so she was responsible for doing a lot around her house. I mean, she would always like totally clean my house, in addition to watching and playing educational games with my kids, and it was just awesome. So, the point of all this is to remember that part of the reason that I chose to homeschool was I liked the socialization that I saw among the homeschoolers. So I also want to just mention, I realize that my situation with living on a military base, and we are in a very small town, we're in a very small desert, very isolated base. I realize that my situation is a lot different than many of you who are watching. We pretty much every house in our neighborhood, like our base is basically like one neighborhood. I mean, it's multiple streets, but it's one neighborhood. It's very small base housing. And most houses have children in them. So, it's kind of sort of like a 50s throwback. Like every afternoon, our kids all meet outside and they all play and they run around the neighborhood pretty much with free reign. And so, homeschooling here, as far as like them getting together with other friends, we are at a huge advantage in that department. So any of you who are watching who live here on base, just rest assured that this is not a typical homeschooling situation where all the kids are home every day. They can kind of do school in the morning, have lunch, play in the afternoon. They readily have, lots and lots of kids to play with. Things would have been very different if this pandemic would have happened when we lived in Virginia. And my kids were some of the only kids on our street, and really on quite a few streets. We had some dear neighbors who, the kids would go over to their house. They call them Grandma Nancy and Grandpa Dan. And, so that was nice, but they didn't have other kids to run around the neighborhood and play with for the most part. So I understand that some of you watching may be in that boat where you somewhat feel isolated. There aren't a ton of kids around in your neighborhood. You would have to drive somewhere to get together with other kids. And that makes it a little bit more challenging. So I guess want to acknowledge that I'm speaking from kind of a different situation, but we're all in different situations. So okay, so the question that got asked yesterday on the Facebook Live about homeschooling was, how do you teach your kids socialization or social skills, I think was how they asked it. And I know people say there's no silly questions, and I would like to agree with that, but I just feel like this is such a silly question. And I don't know who asked. I don't know the person. And I'm not slamming them, but how do you teach your kids anything? How do you teach your kids manners? That's social skills. How do you teach them what's appropriate and inappropriate to talk to an adult? How do you correct them when they maybe, do something wrong in public? Or how do you have friends over and socialize with them, and your kids are watching you socialize with them? Do you go over to other people's houses? Do they play with friends? These are all learning opportunities for social skills. It's not like you sit down and host a social skills class with your children. Now, some you may, I used to work with adults with special needs. I worked with a lot of autistic adults, and I did have to literally sit down and have a class and teach them social skills. When somebody says hello, you say hello back to them, that kind of a thing. But barring that, special needs kind of situations, your kids learn social skills through watching you socialize, and through you socializing with them, through you sitting and having conversation with them, for them playing on the playground and learning how groups of kids socialize together. So, in a way, I feel like that's kind of a silly question, because they learn social skills the same way they learn anything. And then the follow-up to that question that they asked was, how do you teach your kids social skills? Because I'm worried, because I'm going to be homeschooling this year, and I don't want my kids to be weird, because I've worked with some homeschoolers and they're weird. And I'm like, oh my goodness. So, my initial thought when I read that was did you work with public schoolers who were weird too? People are just weird. I don't know that so much has to do with their schooling options. I worked in retail for a lot of years. I worked at Subway for a lot of years. I worked with mostly public school kids, like myself. I was a public school kid too. And we were all weird. We were just weird on the job, in the workplace. So, that question to me is just kind of of course there's weird homeschoolers, just like there's weird public schoolers, and there's weird private schoolers, and there's weird grown-ups who haven't been in school forever. I remember talking with one of my friends here when we first moved here about kids, and she was like, I'm sorry that my kid does da 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 da. And I'm like, all kids are weird. They're all quirky. I've been in enough classrooms to see and know, public school classrooms, to see and know that kids are just weird and quirky, and they don't have great social skills. They're learning. And teens are just sometimes weird and quirky, and I love that about them. And adults, my favorite adults are weird, quirky adults. So I think we need to get this stereotype out of our mind that homeschoolers are just weird. And I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end, but I think, when we're talking about the difference between public school and homeschool, what kind of socialization is happening, it's all happening. It just may be different kinds. So, in schools, of course, just to maintain decorum in the classroom, in the hallways, kids are learning social skills like raising your hand before you speak, getting into a line to go anywhere. Obviously, homeschool kids are not learning those type of social skills. asking permission to use the bathroom. I mean, all of these things, it's like, do you still use any of those as an adult? Do you like have to raise your hand at work to ask if you can use the restroom? No. I mean, a lot of these skills that kind of kids are being trained in public schools, they're to keep, some semblance of control. They're totally necessary. I'm not, ragging on them. They need to do that to keep control. But in homeschool, it's different kind of social skills. You might be teaching them manners, how to say please and thank you, how to talk to you as the mom, with respect and love. And, my kids, like I said, were going over to our neighbor's house. They were, not old couple, but an older, different generation couple, and how to interact with them and have conversations with them, how to help me with a friend's baby if she comes over and, needs help watching her baby, that kind of a thing. So it's different. It's not the same kind of social skills. And this is totally my opinion, so feel free to disagree with it. But I think historically, kind of why people originally started homeschooling was, the same for a lot of first, like for religious freedom. I think a lot of people initially went into home education because they wanted the freedom to teach their children their religious beliefs without, having the public school system kind of dictating what they could and couldn't teach. And so I think, back then, and homeschooling has not been legal in the United States for all that long. I want to say it was like the 1960s or 70s that it became legal. So, I think initially that if that religious kind of inclination was your thing, there could be this feeling of like the world is kind of evil, and so we're going to kind of not be in the world. We're going to kind of sequester ourselves and do our own thing. And I think there could have been that sense of isolation a couple generations ago when homeschooling first, I guess became more mainstream. And nowadays, what I'm finding is that there are just so many reasons that people homeschool. There's a lot of highly educated moms and dads who are choosing to stay home and educate their children for many reasons. For just, they feel like it's superior teaching. They feel like they're, some are children who are on travel sports teams or training for the Olympics or whatever. And so, they choose to homeschool them for that reason. Some, oh my goodness, there's just so many reasons. Some just, we're military. We move every 2.5 years. And so for us, we made the decision that we don't want our kids to go through any more, transitions every 2.5 years than they already do. So, I mean, there's just so many reasons, and really very few of those include isolation, the element of isolation. We're not trying to like hide from anything in the world. We're out there. In fact, I would say that kind of the opposite has been true for us. We have so many social opportunities, particularly when we lived in a bigger city like Virginia Beach. We had so many social opportunities that we would have to turn them down because, we would be exhausted. So, we had co-op, we had a fine arts program through our library system, which was free ballet classes. There was an orchestra. We were a part of the YMCA homeschool PE class. So twice a week my kids would go to a PE class taught by PE teachers. So yeah, I think, some of the motivations to homeschool have changed, and with it have kind of gone, it's not such an isolated thing. And then just how I want to end this is just talking about confirmation bias. So, I've read a little bit this week about confirmation bias because I think this ties in so much with homeschool. And if you aren't aware of what confirmation bias is, it's kind of like our tendency to find evidence to support whatever theory we already believe. So, if you already believe in your mind and your heart that homeschooling is weird, or that homeschoolers are weird, homeschool kids are weird, or homeschool moms are weird, whatever it is that you believe, you're going to look around and find evidence to support that. You're going to be looking for articles that talk about how poorly homeschool kids turn out, how weird they are, how, whatever. You're going to be looking for that one family that that has the weirdest kids in the world, and you're like, yep, see, they homeschool. That's why, all homeschoolers are weird. And so I think it's important for us to recognize that we all have confirmation biases. I remember I'm not going to go into too much detail about this, but I remember struggling with a certain type of religious group and feeling like they were judgmental. And I told my friend, I just think they're judgmental, like across the board. And so I started going to a church that was, of that bent. And that's what I saw. I saw a ton of what I perceived as very judgmental people. I remember my sweet friend Kathy saying, Trish, whatever you kind of believe, like you're going to find it if you look around looking for that. You are definitely going to find 100% of the time what you're looking for, you're going to find it. And it really hit me. It was like, yeah, I was looking for confirmation that like, yep, see, just what I said is true. They're judgmental. And I think it's so similar with homeschooling. So I would just challenge you to challenge your thinking and your thoughts. And, obviously some of you are just jumping in and you're going to give it a try because you have to. But I would just encourage you to think about what you believe about homeschooling and about being a homeschool mom and having homeschooled kids, and just keep an open mind about what that means. I hope this was helpful. Please ask me any questions that you have or topics. I'm not running out of topics, but I feel like I've covered a lot. So if you have other things you want me to talk about, please comment. Thanks.